Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm not going to do an introduction at all. I'm just going to dive right in. So I saw this chart a little while back, and it was quite popular. Have a look at it. Have a think. See if you agree with it. It starts with research, go into wireframes, you might start some design, get into development, and at some point you do this amazing thing called a search engine submission. How many people agree with this sort of process for creating a website? Okay, so you don't know me. Okay. So what's interesting about this is that it implies some sort of finality, I guess, that somehow you're able to predict the future in terms of how to get from A to B. And this was also posted on Reddit, so there was a couple interesting comments because there's always lots of wisdom on that website. But the top comment, if you can't see, is you forgot to add a redesign phase where the client changed their mind. Which is fairly accurate if communication isn't all too great. But it gives us some nice insights, these comments, and especially in terms of what the challenges and the problems are with this sort of traditional model of approaching web design and building websites. The first one is this idea of a masterpiece, right? That you're somehow able to come up with the end result before you've even shipped anything or shown anything to the world. But this is because of how agencies and clients are set up, right? Like you go through the entire process, and launch day comes around, and you ship the website, you deploy the website, whatever, and then the client transfers the other 30% that they still owe you, and the project is complete, and you part ways. A lot of projects, web projects, go down like that. But to me, that doesn't really make sense because websites have become evolving products, right? They're really not about just a nice visual layout anymore. They're a lot more. They create business value for the people that use them or need them even. So if you could create a perfect website off the bat in the first time round, every single time, you'd essentially be able to predict user behavior 3 months from now. That'd be quite amazing. I can't do it, not by a long shot. And if you can predict the future, then you probably wouldn't be sitting here today, right? You'd be sitting at a JavaScript conference. Jokes. So what I'm trying to say is, and this is a pretty good diagram, and it highlights that a lot of people try to build websites in a manner where they build each piece perfectly, as opposed to starting with the whole, but on a much smaller scale. And how that translates back to our diagram here is more so like this, right? So you start, and then you do this process over and over again in a lot of smaller sort of cycles. And this is actually based on, I guess, the lean startup model, right? Where you have this idea, and you build it out trying to use the least amount of resources possible, and then you deploy that. So you try to get it out to people to see how it works as soon as possible. And once you've done that, you're able to learn from that and measure the impact that your website has or the assumptions that you made actually have. And obviously that feedback loop comes full circle because you learn from it, and it impacts your next decisions, your next assumptions, so that you are always becoming better. And a lot of products in the world have evolved like this, right? So Coca-Cola, as simple as it is, I believe the formula has remained the same for years, but the branding and the marketing and everything around it, it's continually being iterated and changed depending on the market, depending on the demographic, and so on. Even something like the iPhone, right, has evolved like this. And most products iterate in this fashion for better or for worse. The second issue I always tend to see is this idea of WordPress being a sandbox, right? It's this plug-in playground where people just want to be able to install WordPress, have a theme, and then start throwing a lot of different functionality at it, be it forms, sliders, galleries. Then you have all your tools for your blog. And these things start stacking up. And somewhere in there, your core mission, the core mission of what the website is supposed to do, and most websites only try to do 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 things, but not more than that. That sort of core goal is buried deep down, but even worse, you start adding a lot of code to your repository, which is just not so great, right? You start accumulating this sort of technological debt, and this is really, in my opinion, coming from a position of weakness, because you're easily allowing decisions to be made or code to be committed or new features to be added without really understanding the impact that might come out of it. So one of these things could be, well, let's say you have a lot of different tools that impact layout. All of a sudden, the amount of different potential layouts that are available on the website multiply exponentially. So we've definitely worked on larger projects where there's 100 or 200 content creators, and all of a sudden they have too many options, and a good 80% of these options are just not worth it, because they're actually bringing down conversions, they're bringing down click-throughs, and they're trying to provide flexibility for everyone, but in the end, they're actually doing more harm than good. One of the nice examples I always enjoy when I look online is there's Melinda Gates, who has a blog where she posts, and Bono does too from YouTube. And they're both on medium.com, and they both have the exact same design, right? But somehow we feel that all our small websites are so spectacular and so special that we need to add all these little features and widgets, and then completely lose the grand idea of what we're trying to achieve. So this may sound a bit dark, but honestly, when I started web design ages ago, the whole premise was, or how people would sell themselves, they'd say, well, this is hand-coded, this is handcrafted code, and then we kind of moved on to say, crafting responsive websites, or we have media-rich websites, and we're only really talking about the tool. We're not really talking about the end result. As web designers, web developers, I think we're at an interesting point, because websites are essentially becoming commoditized, right? You're seeing a lot of good websites out there that are just being built by either like WordPress.com, Squarespace, or any other sort of builder. So what value do we bring if all we're doing is just developing, right? There needs to be this sort of, we need to come full circle between not only design and code, but also the actual product itself and what we're trying to achieve from a goal perspective. So some ideas about that. The first is becoming a product owner. It sounds larger than it seems. It's more about an attitude than a job description. But let's say you have 10 random people involved in a project. Probably 8 of them don't have that kind of web experience. They don't really understand how GitHub works or how adding lots of code kind of breaks things over the long run. They don't understand that. But these 10 people then contribute to about 100 opinions, and things start falling apart quite quickly. So one of the things that we always try to do, especially on the larger projects, is having this sort of product ownership. And a great way to translate something like that is to be able to have, say, goals or design principles, let's say, in terms of even like a mission statement, right? What is the mission of the website? How are you going to evaluate every single feature request or idea that someone has against a larger vision? So for one of the projects we had, which was, I'll show you an example later, which was a large blogger network, the goals was reading and user experience, so really just like the actual readability of it all, social engagement, and extending the user journey. Those were the 3 goals. Extending the user journey was really just about getting the user to, once they read something or consumed one piece of content, to go further into the site somewhere else. If it didn't fit within these 3 buckets, we just said no. And that helped us really stay on point, to really be able to stay on the goal so that we could actually push those goals to push the project further to actually be successful, which is not the easiest thing to do when you have 200 content creators. And in this case, the particular blogger network was United Influencers, which is probably the largest blogging content network site in Scandinavia, because that's a big thing out there. And we had to not only look at what our goals and design principles were, but then also understand what were the low-hanging fruit. What is the big picture we're going after? And sometimes people have they have their own idea of what that is without even looking at the numbers and trying to find the lowest hanging fruit. In this case, if you look at the traffic by device, you'll see that, almost 70% of the traffic came through mobile devices. So something like a tablet was hardly used. Desktop wasn't the largest priority. Then 46% of overall traffic, the entire platform, came from iPhones themselves. So already we knew where to focus our early attention in terms of trying to boost conversion or click-through rates or whatever it is. What was furthermore quite interesting too, to be able to cut this through, was to look at which templates or which pages were the most successful. In this case, the article feed, or rather, just the regular blog, the chronological list of posts, was by far the most popular view. So people would just go on the index and then just scroll and read post and post and post. But something like a customized homepage, which was a big sort of point that the bloggers really wanted to control over, because it gave them the impression of having a homepage to their blog, just wasn't used at all. And by having the data, we were able to also argue against that and push back and say no. And then really to be able to focus not only on the article feed, but the article feed on mobile devices. So all of a sudden, we were being able to target a good 30% of overall traffic through a very particular view and change conversion quite drastically just for that. Another thing is, I guess we've been quite used to looking at Google Analytics as a way to sort of measure site performance or how successful a website is, potentially just in sheer traffic, which is not always the best way to look at things. But there's also other tools out there, right? So there's Optimizely and other A/B testing tools. There's Mixpanel and other people analytics or event tracking tools. And there's also Hotjar, which is a bit different. So I thought I'd show Hotjar. I created a small app a couple months ago called Vitobi, just to remind me to sit up straight when I'm at the computer. So it just does that every 5 minutes now, which is getting somewhat annoying. At least my posture's better. But I installed Hotjar on here, and it's quite cool because it allows me to see very different views. On the left side, we have the actual clicks. So you're not seeing very many clicks throughout the website, really just on the video, and it's really, really condensed. So that means that all the other clicks are being diluted quite a bit. So my intended purpose of someone having to click on a video is great. That's working out. Then mouse movement, a bit random, but we can also see that people are hovering over the download button, which is also great. And then lastly, the actual scroll view. Red means 100%. So seen the red stuff, which is good because my call to action is then above the fold, which is the download button. And then the green area down here represents roughly 64% of traffic, which again, I'm pleased with. But it highlights other things too. Something like in the very top left corner, there's these little blue dots there. This is the click map again. And you'll see people have been clicking there, but the joke is there's no link there. So that's probably something I should fix if I feel motivated one of these days to actually fix it. But it's quite impressive to be able to see things like this because analytics will never tell you that, right? Another thing is being able to see the user journey, right? That's something completely different than to be able to try and understand the user journey through a series of page views in Google Analytics. In this case, you can see the person read through, comes back up, probably watches the video, and at some point clicks the download button. Cool. And even just watching 100 of these user sessions will paint a completely different picture for you in terms of understanding how people use your website. And if you're really just starting out, it's quite a painful process, because you'll notice a lot more what the issues are with your website than by just releasing a website and looking at traffic and saying, well, traffic is up. That's that. The last little piece of advice, I guess, is this concept that when we look at analytics, we like to find a story within it, right? So we can look at a bounce rate that changes over time, and we try to find a linear explanation for it, which doesn't always make sense. Over I don't know, the last 10, 15 years, I've looked at so many analytics and various data sets and all that there's always been like, I don't know, 4 or 5 things that impact how one figure is moving or changing. So it's very unrealistic to look at one figure and then pass judgment on that or create a story based off that. A good example is bounce rate, right? So if I tell you my website has a bounce rate of 86%, are you going to say that's high? Is that low? The problem is the value by itself is not an insight. It's just a data point, right? So it could actually be a great value or it could be a terrible value. But either way, like for me, the whole thing really comes back to, yes, we're creating code, yes, we're designing stuff, but that's really just a fragment of creating a website that's going online that people are going to use. You want to know how people use them so you can change it over time, and that you can also do so quickly without having too much code behind it, and that you're really focusing on the core elements of creating that website and what the goals are there. So with that, thank you very much. Let's get some comments going. Questions, feedback, agree, disagree? This is quiet. Yes? You'll get a microphone. Teray, come on. Step it up. Yeah. I think at the beginning is the best place. So Hotjar, you could, because if you're doing a redesign, you're actually creating a completely new set of assumptions most of the time. You're changing the layout completely. You might be using different copy. It's all very different. So being able to test very early on is probably the most valuable place. The other place, which is often forgotten and a lot of people don't necessarily look at, is the analytics of the past site or the old site. So even installing something like Hotjar on the old site to be able to get, I don't know, 500 user sessions or something like that, just to get an idea of how it's working, is already immensely valuable. You'll be able to form way better arguments towards the client, towards other stakeholders within the project, mostly to say no to a lot of the stuff and to be able to focus on the largest opportunities that exist. Does that make sense? Cool. Yep, all the way at the back. Teray's coming. Otherwise, people can't hear you. Oh, yeah. United Influencers. Yeah. Getting Teray to run around. Just another day in the office.
What else did you notice about the site where it had a high data point for mobile use? What other insights could you share about a similar audience? They're very mobile. What other things could you pull out of that?
I think that one of the interesting things, so the question was about how, what other insights came from this sort of audience on this particular blog network. Time of day was probably one of the most interesting things. So certainly in the morning, people consume content very differently than in the afternoon and once they got out of work, where they took the time. So morning was really a lot more shooting through stuff, just kind of skimming, whereas in the evenings it was more just reading, and you could actually really see that from either user sessions or even Google Analytics to a certain extent, right? So you can configure Google Analytics to fire certain events to better be able to understand how someone reads a page as opposed to just viewing the page itself. So definitely time of day, because then you can also play with the content depending on those. And also, I guess if you don't have the traffic quite yet, it doesn't make sense to make that sort of investment. But if you're hitting a few 100,000 page views a day already, then it does make sense to look at time of day and serving up the right sort of content then.
Right, and just from a design, did you go to accelerated mobile pages?
We did. I believe we did in the end.
What did you notice with that?
I'm not sure. I didn't take part in the project after that anymore. But I believe AMP has actually worked, if I'm not mistaken. There was a couple studies that came out, and now the whole sort of the business side of it, and if you agree with it or disagree with how it's governed and all that kind of stuff is a different question. But it seems that it has performed for a number of companies using it. Yeah, pleasure.
How do you define expectations from this idea of a masterpiece? Saying, I'm going to give you a website that's going to be evolve over time, and I'm going to be selling a masterpiece. I'm going to sell you this starting point.
Yeah. I think it's. It depends on the client and what sort of relationship you have with them, obviously. But being able to get them to focus on the largest goal they're trying to achieve. So let's say like a small business traditionally has a single goal on their website, increase business in some way or another. Larger brands, it might be about brand awareness and social sharing and God knows what else, but your typical small business just needs sales. So being able to focus on that off the bat and trying to ship something early that you're able to measure on and also report back on, I think is the big value here, especially if you're setting up a recurring contract or an agreement on a monthly term to send a report back in terms of how the website is performing. All of a sudden, you're not only providing a website, but you're also providing some form of business intelligence and reporting back to them that they also find valuable, and that at a lower cost than the all-in price to begin with, if that makes sense. Cool. Yeah. Well, no. So with our company, Humanmade, we're usually part of significantly larger products or teams, that have product teams. They have intelligence teams within them. This is based on my experiences or even our experiences with certain startups or I guess smaller clients that I used to have, where I guess it was just a shorter sort of time frame, or it was a limited time frame. So once the gig was up, it just kind of moved on. But the relationship was always one of just an active sort of product role, as opposed to this grand milestone we're working towards. So it's really, if anything, we're billing towards our time and maintenance and the hours we spend, as opposed to fixed goals. But to answer your question, I guess that's you could do it like that if they really have that sort of solid vision. But I'd be surprised if many small businesses or medium businesses know exactly what they want. They may think they know what they want, but what actually ends up happening is a different story, I guess.
So I guess
Yeah.
that's probably more what I'm saying is, as you as the expert, right? When
Yep.
you're coming to the end of that project, are you then going, okay, here are some recommendations that we have, some areas that we have for you to think about down the track.
Yeah.
Be it optimization.
Oh, yeah.
Or
I'd say yes. I mean, that's if we're if we remember to do so, like I think upselling and selling beyond, like sometimes you just have to remember to do it. But yes, that's the natural way to upsell more. Upsell more business, like down the line, and providing those recommendations is definitely the best way to do so.
More questions? You still have a bit of time.
Cool. Yeah. Sorry? More examples of? Yeah. So maybe you can tell me what kind of project you're working on right now.
Okay. Our website sells plastic products.
Sells what, sorry?
Plastic products. And
Yeah.
the main aim is to sell plastic products for export because they're one way. They never come back, so
Yeah.
you have to keep buying them.
Yeah. Right, so I guess with any sort of thing like this, you try to understand and you're handling the entire web presence, also outbound marketing, or just inbound marketing? Outbound, you're doing advertising and you're doing paid search engine advertising. Inbound, you're doing on-page optimization.
Not advertising.
Okay, right, so you're only doing on-page. I think the biggest thing there is always trying to approach it from the lowest hanging fruit in terms of where's your referral traffic coming in from, what kind of audience are they? Are you able to speak to that audience? So are they actually, once they hit the website, where are they going? Right? Are they clicking on a PDF brochure? Are they clicking on the actual sales orders? And being able to understand if those click-through rates are high enough, or if they're completely missing your call to actions. So really tackling the top of the funnel with any given project, I guess, is really the goal in this case, and not necessarily, trying to optimize the footer on page 3. I'm happy to look at your website after, though, if you want, and we can chat about it. Cool. Which box was that? Was it before? Back. Am I going all the way to the beginning? I'm at the beginning. Just tell me. Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 Hardly ever. Hardly ever. Well, the difference is between the content creators and the people who create the website is that they're the experts at creating content, and you're the expert at building the website and making sure that the content is consumed, distributed, understood, well experienced by the viewer. You have the data, in your hands to be able to make informed decisions and to be able to go back to them and say, well, actually, look, the thing you're trying to get us to add, this plugin you're trying to add, might only affect 1% of the entire user base. That's just not worth it. I mean, typically, if something didn't affect 80% of the user base, we weren't installing it to begin with anyway. You really just get in the habit of saying no through data. So it's really being able to have that data on hand, making sure that as soon as you start a project, you're already recording data. Not that you do it down the line, but that you have historical data too. Just to be able in that position to be able to just argue, and you want to be able to argue with yourself before that. Yeah. Oh, I gotta find this box now. That's well possible.
But the overlying objective that gives you the framework to be able to make those decisions.
Oh, you're talking about the three design things, like the design principles or the goals we had for the particular project. That was used for everything. So the only times there was exceptions was, I don't know, 1%, 2% of the cases. Obviously, the exceptions are bypassed if everyone's relaxed about it and doesn't fight. But as a product owner, you try to fight back so that you have more time and resources to be able to focus on the core goal. Otherwise, your entire efforts just get muddied and all this other stuff that's just not worth it. So, pleasure.
One more question.
Cool.
You spoke about, just before in the QA, about the benefits of setting up analytics on their existing site.
Yep.
To do some benchmarking, to obviously show them the value in this new site and help educate them in terms of conversion optimization, I suppose, later on. In your production workflow, do you design the functional proof of concept website first using like agile method, or do you do like an agency style, we'll design the site first and then build it once approved, then we'll test the hypothesis that
Yeah.
is the market ideal customer.
I mean, whatever's quickest.
Yeah. And then years after launch, this I'm just curious.
Yeah.
So then after launch, years after each sort of additional package, I know there was talk of possible upsells, but after launch, is there some sort of additional package where you will hold their hand for a little while and help them understand the great improvements on the website, and then if you find that further conversion optimization is still required based on additional data, then you talk them through that process and help them tweak that out as well to get the highest conversion rate.
Right. So in terms of the first question, in terms of which method to use, the most pragmatic and the fastest way that gets code deployed to the website is the one we'll always prefer, regardless of methodology. It's really insanely valuable to get something up quickly, and even if it's, let's say you have this assumption, and this assumption is going to take a lot of time to develop. You can even try to fake some of that stuff by having a button that goes to it, and then on the page itself it says, well, this feature hasn't been developed yet, but we'll let you know when it is. But even that intent to click through to it already provides a good idea of how people want to use that, or how many people are just interested. Towards the second question about packages, so we've always been involved in more of a partnership with companies. So we've taken equity to help them out because they're a startup. So we've never had like an upsell package in that regard. We usually just part ways as soon as they're funded, or for whatever other reason. We usually don't extend that beyond like a year or two. But the idea is definitely for teams like that they have the knowledge in-house. It doesn't make sense for them to outsource that for the rest of time, because in these cases they are partially technology companies. So very different scenario than small to medium-sized business that might be legacy, might be old, or whatever. So hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Great. Pleasure.